Ladies, gentlemen, and gods of all ages, yesterday, nearly out of nowhere, Hades 2 dropped in early access on Steam, fully available for entry to anyone who wants it in. That said, there are a ton of people now just slowly streaming into it for the first time, and given the first thing that I did after this release was just play the game for hours, I thought it might be nice to share any knowledge that I gleaned during this time for newer players, specifically in the realm of how to get better, stronger, faster, things that you should care about maybe more than you think you should, and then just some strong weapon and boon combinations as well, especially centered around getting you through the first floor boss at the very least, as that will be the first wall for anyone not particularly used to this style of game, especially as I really want people to get to the second boss of the game, which I'm not going to spoil in this video, but I think is probably one of the coolest bosses I have ever seen in a game, to be completely honest. Starting off then, just to rapid fire some things that are either relatively simple or carry over from the first game, but important for new players who have never played it, of course. Prioritize defensive play. Unless your build has regeneration built into it in some way, health will be a defining factor of your success at any given time. At the same time, that doesn't mean that you should turn down boons for max health upgrades or things like that. It just means consider the option, sure, but play for safety in each individual room rather than playing for speed of clear, things like that, especially early on in your runs when you have limited power. When selecting your next room, after finishing the current one, you'll be given a choice of possible rewards that you can go for. Skull-labeled rooms are harder inherently, often containing mini-boss type enemies, which are much harder, but tend to have higher rarity rewards at the end. Generally speaking, outside of that though, you will favor rooms with boons over all else, and at least until you have a strong base setup running. Then you'll want things like pomegranates for upgrades, which are absolutely fantastic, especially early upgrades on skills are worth a lot more than later upgrades, so you want to get a good smattering of early upgrades once you've got a good build base going. Gold is good to get as reward if you want to save for the shop, which can get you a lot of power in itself for your current run, and most other things are generally dependent on a different factor, which is when playing each run, you want to consider your actual goals. Do you want this immediate run to be as successful as possible, or do you want all future runs to become easier? This is a common part of the thought process of the game, and there's no real right answer. It's sort of up to you in each individual situation. All that said, there are a couple of particularly high priority room types that you want to aim for if they arise pretty much no matter what. The Daedalus Hammer, which is like a boon itself but contains pretty major upgrades to choose from that are unique to each weapon and can drastically alter your playstyle. These are extremely strong. If you see it, you pretty much just want it, and especially if you are offered one early in a run, you can't really say no. Second to that are event rooms. These will, 9 times out of 10, be worth more than the rewards that you would get from the other options, and also generally don't contain combat at all, which makes it a free room as far as preserving your health. And again, defensive play is key to longer, deeper runs in Hades 2. As far as boons, there are lots of specific synergies that you can make between them, especially as there are just significantly more boons in this game seemingly already than there were in the first game. But generally speaking, if you are looking for early advice, it's not bad to sort of just favor a single Olympian's boons and try and go with that same Olympian every time you see them, as generally they will always synergize well within themselves, and this can unlock some pretty powerful effects as well. Past that, outside of gameplay itself, you also want to consider materials and minor finds, which are things like ashes or psyche, which are currencies that you can spend on permanent upgrades in between runs. That said, moving on to Hades 2 specific stuff now, one thing that I heavily recommend is trying to grab psyche, specifically when you have the option early on. Yes, it won't grant you immediate power for your current run, but it is the most limiting factor to unlocking an extremely powerful early upgrade. After your first run, you unlock the ability to use the altar in the hub to unlock tarot cards, which are essentially a sort of much more in-depth replacement to the Mirror of Darkness system from the first game. As you unlock cards here, which cost ashes, you reveal more cards that you can unlock. Every card has a cost denoted in the corner, which is its grasp cost. It can only equip cards up to your maximum grasp in the top right corner of the screen, but you can raise this maximum number in exchange for psyche, which is why it is so important to gather. But more specifically, it is because you need at least 15 maximum to activate the Centaur card, which is column 3, row 3, which gives you 3 bonus maximum life and 3 bonus maximum magic for every 5 rooms that you clear. This may not seem overly crazy in itself, but what makes it incredibly good is both that it itself costs 0, so the way that you activate it is by investing in other cards, and then it's just a byproduct of that, so you can create your own setup of cards that cost 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which requires 15 maximum grasp at least. And then you just get this effect passively, always boosting you as you get further and further into your runs, making you stronger as you progress. Moving on a bit from that then though, in the first Hades, your cast was by default a projectile fired forwards that cost 1 of your blood crystals. Then it got lodged in an enemy, yada yada, but in this game, your cast has no resource cost at all. No matter what weapon you use, your cast is a circle that spawns around you and roots or otherwise massively slows enemies that are caught within. The only limiter to this circle really is that you can only only have one active at a time, so you actually have no restriction on having it active, which means that you can put it up pretty much 100% of the time. And it is extremely important to get used to this sooner rather than later, as it can often invalidate the difficulty of faster moving or more melee focused enemies, especially when they start to swarm you in larger groups too. In the first game, your cast by default was sort of a damage tool, an alternate thing that you could build boons off of, but in Hades 2, even by default, it is a set and forget massively useful crowd control tool that you want to learn to abuse as soon as possible in your runs. That said, there is a sort of resource limited combat option in Hades 2 as well, which are the Omega moves. You do Omega moves by holding down and charging any of the attack, special, or cast buttons, with Omega attacks and specials being different depending on which weapon you use, of course, as it will generally be based off of the basic attack and special. But the Omega cast is the same regardless of weapon, which is just the standard cast circle, but with a nice pop of damage at the end of it. Omega moves all cost magic to use, of which you have 50 maximum by default, and you can gain more of this too, and this refills at the start of each room, but has no natural regeneration. Instead, for that purpose, you want to look towards boons. There are tons of ways to be effective with your basic attacks or specials in this game, depending on your weapon of choice, but a more surefire and easy synergy type combo to go for early on in your early runs is to create high damage per magic usage combos with your Omega attacks, then combine that with a good source of magic regen. Every god will have their own style of regeneration boon that will fit your build differently. For example, Demeter will give you regen for standing idle for over a second, which may sound a bit dangerous, but it's actually really strong. Or Zeus, who will lower your maximum magic by a massive amount, but give you hefty just passive per second magic regen, allowing for some interesting combos all in itself. The specific ways that you synergize these have even more variety in themselves, honestly, but generally, especially with the Witch's Staff, the base weapon, you can't really go wrong with building around your Omega moves, making them bombs of damage in some way, shape, or form, then just getting some nice regen on top of that. On the subject of the weapons and how to make them strong with certain boons early on, the second technical weapon, though two have the same unlock requirements, is the Sister Blades. These are a dagger and sickle combo that have an astonishingly rapid attack combo and a ranged dagger throw option as the special, with the Omega attack being a teleport and the Omega special being a fan of knives. This has multiple unique ways of comboing with boons, the best early combo really that you can get being just spamming Hestia boons, the goddess of the hearth, who can give you the scorch effect on your base attacks. This builds a number up on an enemy that you can see under their feet each time that an attack lands on them, and they tick for 40 of that damage each time per second. This means that you can do a quick burst attack combo that builds number up high, then run away, and they will still keep ticking as long as they have that number built on them. And the initial damage of Scorch as an effect is actually extremely hefty early game when you have high attack speed on something like the daggers. There are also further ways that you can boost Scorch. These were on a staff run, but to show you as an example, there's a boon that makes Scorch pop for massive damage if you can stack the number up high enough. There are ways to increase the maximum amount of Scorch per second. There are tons of further ways to just scale Scorch up as a mechanic though generally, but high attack speed just combos so well with it, and Hestia is a common boon that you'll actually be finding early in the game, which I'll touch on in a moment why that's important. But next we have the Umbral Flames, with the attack being a rapidly spammed projectile that both pierces enemies and bounces off of walls. Yes, you heard that right, it bounces off of walls and pierces, and if you hold the rapid fire long enough, it will start firing off much heftier versions of the projectile that do more than 3 times the damage at the cost of 5 magic each. The special fires this projectile in an orbit around you as a sort of protective layer for a couple of moments, then the Omega special just does multiple of the same thing. This one is specifically a weapon I would say requires a bit more of an advanced idea of how you want to make synergies in the game before you go in with it, as the attack and special play very differently from each other depending on which one you want to focus on, and the way that they synergize with boons is just sort of crazy because either way, their unique properties of bouncing and piercing can just make them work so much better with some effects than other ones. For example, Aphrodite can make your attack and special do bonus damage to close enemies. If you combine that with the special, which will always be hitting close enemies due to orbiting around you, it lets you play a much more movement style build where you build a radius of damage surrounding you and just sort of dodge and move in when the opportunity arises. I would definitely say that this weapon has a higher skill floor to manage with, but it also has a super high ceiling, I think, with the right boons on it too. Past that then we have the Moonstone axe, which is a bit hard to wield at first, much slower attacks but heftier base damage numbers, leading to a high risk but high reward playstyle, at least until you know the timings and enemy patterns a bit better, and the risk of course goes down. The special attack is a rotating block in front of you as well, but if you fully charge it into an Omega attack, it stops blocking and you can sort of get hit, but it does launch off a sort of line of circular effects on the floor in front of you doing massive damage. It's a very dangerous effect because if you block for too long, you stop blocking and you don't really know when until you get used to it, but this block effect is extremely effective, stopping any forward hitting damage that will attack you that isn't a floor-based effect specifically, which is an extremely powerful thing that you can have if you can get used to using that block and the timings on it. The Omega attack specifically then is a slowly charging high high damage multi-hit Whirlwind, which actually can also work extremely well with Scorch, as I mentioned for the Sister Blaze, the Hestia Boons. Specifically, if you get Scorch on attacks and then get magic regen and boost on mega attacks, you then apply a load of Scorch extremely quickly with the axe while doing the Whirlwind, while also applying high damage from the attack itself. As well, just sort of outside of that, personally I like things like Demeter's Frost for this, as Demeter's Boons can make your special, or hey, even with the other weapons, you can put this on your special or attack. Put her Boons can actually let you freeze enemies completely, like straight up fully stun them, CC them for an extended period of time. It will fully stun lock basic enemies, even if they have armor, which is the yellow health bar enemies, and it even provides massive openings to deal damage on things like bosses when it procs, which again makes this just awesome for every weapon in the game, but uniquely special for Axe 2, I think, which has high benefit from large openings. Then there is one more weapon, at least in the early access, but to put it simply, it requires some pretty deep progress that I've just not yet achieved myself, so I can't really talk about it yet, but know that it exists, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty cool weapon too. Outside of specific weapon combos then, my biggest remaining piece of advice for anyone who is still struggling to make progress early in your first few runs in Hades 2 is, well, stop caring so much about making progress in your early runs of Hades 2. Your early runs can have deep progress, sure. If you happen to get some strong synergies going, you have to be like a god at dodging, or if you just get lucky, honestly. But like the first game, your first few runs are considered the tutorial of the game. Even on a very basic level, you literally don't have access to all of the mechanics that will be in your toolkit until multiple runs in, such as things like hexes, which will replace calls from the first game, acting as a sort of ultimate ability that synergizes with magic use, and omega skills, and activates a whole other world of build synergy and power, or things like Hephaestus, who can create completely bonkers weird runs with the most unexpected but powerful effect, like making you cause massive explosions every time you sprint for at least a second. But these boon types just aren't available in your first few runs of the game. That's not to say don't try, that's not to say don't try to get as far as you can in your early runs, but it's to say don't get discouraged if you don't. As you do more runs, even if you fail, you collect things like ashes and psyche. You meet the characters, progress the story somewhat, and unlock even more ways of boosting your own power further. So as much as it may seem obvious to some, I feel like it's important to just really say, hey, if you are struggling the first few runs, the game will get easier. Not only will you get better at it, the more that you play it, the more you get used to the weapons, the timings of things, the enemies and their patterns, as you get better at making synergies with different boons, but literally, the game will get easier as you unlock the card upgrades and get more of a grasp to equip more cards. And there's even things like keepsakes. I haven't even mentioned that. After you unlock it relatively early on, or you can start to find nectar on your runs, which you can give to the various NPCs of the game world, and the first nectar that you give to each NPC of the game grants you a keepsake, which are tokens that you can choose to carry for an entire run. They give you a different passive boost for each one. My personal early recommendation for this is Odysseus's keepsake, which not only heavily lowers the damage of all bosses of every region, but also lowers the health of the next boss that you encounter after equipping it. To put it simply, the reason that your runs are ending is because of bosses specifically. This will make it a hell of a lot less painful the moment that you get it and equip it. And even more specifically, if you're struggling with Hecate, and the main reason that I see people struggle with Hecate in the first place is the intermission phases where she just sort of goes immortal and just pelts you with magic while you have to kill her little friends without stopping because you have to be constantly dodging things. But a real cheat code for this specific interaction is the Vortex Sprint boon from Demeter. This does damage around you as you sprint. It creates a vortex that forms around you, doesn't cost any magic or anything, it just does damage when you sprint. So this phase, what you can do when you have this is just sprint to avoid the damage anyways, like you would be, while emitting damage around you to kill the adds and end the phase safely. And again, to sort of branch off of that, you should probably sprint more than you are. If you hold the dodge button, you sprint. This is new to Hades 2, and there are just a ton of attacks that are made to be impossible to dodge in this game without sprinting. It's a mechanic that the whole game is built around, so you don't want to forget it, simple as that. And that's honestly just a couple out of probably hundreds of ways the game will get easier for you over time. Some ways through literally just your character power increasing, of course, but some through just putting together your knowledge of different boons or different mechanics in the game with different enemy types and attacks that are just a sore spot to get through, maybe. And just applying this together to make yourself strong on any run that you have in Hades 2, because with this knowledge, it's be a lot easier to do that for yourself. That's pretty much it for today then, everyone. Just a sort of basic to mid-level guide for how to just get gooder faster at Hades 2, how to essentially get over the hump of moving to the second floor and beyond that, as well as just building a sort of solid base ways to progress your gameplay journey on. After all, it's no fun if I hold your hand the whole way through and tell you exactly what to do. I just want to help put you in the right mindset, the right sort of basic setups to actually improve from and have a better experience with when you get to play the game yourself. However it is that you choose to play it. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and I'm going to get back to playing the game, honestly. I can't stop. Let me know both if you guys want more Hades 2 videos and what kinds of things that you'd like to know or even just see in general. I am absolutely in love with this game from my first few hours with it, and I honestly just want to see as many people get into it as possible. I think it really deserves it. Supergiant genuinely deserves it for what they have created here so far even. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.